The Way of Kings is the first book in the Stormlight Archive series. In this series of videos, I'll be recapping all plot lines, character arcs, themes, world building, and explaining anything I deem confusing or mysterious that I believe is necessary for a full understanding of the Stormlight Archive. I will assume basic Cosmere and Roshar knowledge since you clicked on this video. This video contains full spoilers for The Way of Kings and very minor spoilers for the later books. The Way of Kings begins with a prelude to the Stormlight Archive, showing the last desolation. 4,500 years before the main story takes place, there are 10 godlike people called heralds who protect the world of Roshar from the Voidbringers. 10 is a significant number in the series, and it likely stems from the 10 heralds. There are 10 orders of the Knights Radiant, 10 Alethi High Princes, it takes 10 heartbeats to summon a Shardblade, and the series will be 10 main books. In between fighting these Voidbringers, the heralds must endure intense torture. This cycle is called a desolation. Unable to endure the torture any longer, the heralds abandon the oath pact to humanity, hoping that the last surviving herald, Talonel, can hold back evil alone. And this turns out to be true. Talonel protected humanity from the Voidbringers for 4,500 years, until, in the epilogue of this book, he admits that he failed. The desolation has come, O God, it has come, and I have failed. Szeth, the assassin in white, is sent by the Parshendi to kill King Gavilar the day a treaty is being signed between the Kingdom of Alethkar and the Parshendi. Szeth has an honor blade, like the one the heralds had. It's similar to a shard blade, but it gives the user surge binding abilities. Inside, he finds King Gavilar with the shard plate and blade ready to confront him. Szeth eventually slays him with a powerful lashing from an outside balcony, causing Gavilar to fall and collapse. As he is dying, Gavilar asks Szeth to tell his brother that he must find the most important words a man can say, and gives Szeth a small, glowing black orb. This orb emits a black light, and it's actually linked to the Voidbringers, although we won't see this kind of light until Rhythm of War. And Szeth, through his heritage, regards dying requests as sacred, writes Gavilar's message in his blood on a slab of wood before he escapes. The first chapter is also a prologue, but for Kaladin's story. Kaladin is the main character in The Way of Kings. He is a natural leader and deeply cares about protecting people under his command. He's often intimidating to people and wears his trauma and depression for everyone to see. Dalinar even notes that he is such a hard man for one so young. And Shallan has a monologue about how intense and passionate he is. Kaladin is angry at the world, and nothing will change that. He is tall and lean, with shoulder-length brown hair and dark brown eyes. In this part of the world, the class system is based on eye color. People with light-colored eyes are born to rule and are superior to dark eyes. The eye colors range from light tan, gray, blue, green, and violet. It originated from the Knights Radiant, an organization on Roshar that lived thousands of years ago. When they betrayed mankind and left, they left their shard blades and shard plate. Now, the humans of Roshar possess these weapons, and the weapons always turn the wielder's eyes into a lighter color. Shardbearers are this world's version of dragon riders. The weapons are remarkably valuable. It is said that they are worth entire kingdoms. They give men increased strength and resistance to regular swords. For a people who obsess over war, shards offer a substantial and crucial advantage. To function properly, the shards need to be activated by Stormlight, a mystical power that only comes from high storms. Kaladin is a squad leader in Amram's army. They mostly fight in border disputes between other kingdoms near Alethkar. Alethkar natives are said to be a warlike people. It's mostly sport for them, since Alethi women do all the science, engineering, and reading. Alethi men spend most of their lives fighting. Sen is a new soldier in Amram's army, and he's recruited to join Kaladin's squad. Kaladin actually paid money to get Sen in his squad, and as we'll learn later, Kaladin often seeks out helpless or weak people and aims to protect them. As the battle begins, everything descends into chaos. However, Kaladin's squad stays organized. Sen eventually gets separated from the squad, and before he is cut down, Kaladin saves him. Then they spot a shardbearer who appears to charge in their direction. Sen calls the Shardbearer beautiful, like a work of art, and a majestic creature. The chapter ends just before the Shardbearer attacks. The story skips ahead 8 months where Kaladin is now a slave, and he has been branded as dangerous on account of his many attempts to escape. While imprisoned, he notices a wind spren that seems to follow him. Spren are manifestations of emotions, concepts, and natural forces. They symbolize the connection between the physical and cognitive realms. Kaladin questions his sanity as he's the only one that can see or hear the wind spren. This spren is called Syl. She's mischievous, optimistic, and naive, and she has no knowledge of her past. After this, we are introduced to our second main character, Shallan Devar. Shallan is a girl in her late teens with light blue eyes and long red hair. Shallan is soft-spoken and naive, but also very intelligent and creative. She also has a sort of photographic memory where she blinks her eyes and can remember an image perfectly. Shallan is determined to become the ward of Jasnah Kholin. Jasnah is the king's older sister. She has tan skin, dark hair, and light purple eyes. Jasnah is stern, serious, and very intimidating to Shallan. Shallan's true motivation in becoming Jasnah's ward is to steal Jasnah's soulcaster so her family can reestablish their riches lost by their father's death. We actually see the soulcaster, or what we think is the soulcaster, in the first meeting with Jasnah. The king of Kharbranth, a man named Taravangian, comes to Jasnah asking for her to save his granddaughter, and Jasnah only does it to gain access to the Palanium, a giant library. And we're told that her soulcaster is particularly powerful, literally turning any substance into another one. Shallan's initial attempt to convince Jasnah to accept her fails, but she buys some books to fill gaps in her academic knowledge and waits to petition Jasnah again, hoping her persistence is a trait Jasnah values. In the midst of her learning, Shallan decides to draw a picture of Jasnah, and we see for the first time her drawing process, something that will become increasingly important as the story progresses. Drawing is a therapy for Shallan. It says that tension bleeds from her fingers while she draws. She also describes drawing like entering a trance, that she loses herself while her fingers draw on their own accord. In the peak of her focus, when several creation spren have formed, Shallan will enter a deeper trance. Her mind is engulfed in visions of her drawings and of other things. In this vision, she sees the power by which the Almighty created the world, and she calls it He Who Transforms. This could be foreshadowing Shallan's future character transformation in the later books, because her ability to light weave can transform her face. After the intense vision, Shallan meets an Ardent named Capsule. Ardents are monk-like priests, and Capsule is here to convert Jasnah to his religion since she's an atheist. Capsule isn't like other Ardents Shallan has met. He's charming and charismatic, and Shallan takes a liking to him partly because he's tall, lean, and handsome, and he's also flirtatious and compliments her drawing. They share some kind words and bond over their shared interest in jam. When Jasnah returns, she scolds Shallan for coming back, but upon discovering Shallan's impressive gallery of paintings, Jasnah decides to accept Shallan as her ward, recognizing her as a self-taught artist who pursues knowledge for its own sake. Kaladin's slave caravan arrives at the Shattered Plains. He's then sold to be part of High Prince Sadeas's bridge crews. Shattered Plains was inspired by southern Utah in the United States, and the giant chasms are similar to the crevices between large orange rocks in many Utah national parks. Bridgemen are the lowest members of society. They haul bridges across giant chasms and serve as meat shields for the army. Most don't survive. Kaladin thought that there was nothing more that life could do to him. Nothing worse than a slave's brand. Nothing worse than failing those he'd sworn to protect. It appeared that he'd been wrong. There had been something more they could do to him. One final torment the world had reserved for him, and it was called Bridge 4. The bridge runs continue, and more people die around Kaladin. Kaladin was once the leader of the best squad in Amram's army, but now he is a sickly, apathetic man filled with despair and hopelessness. Kaladin says that his existence is to be killed. A young boy joins Bridge 4, and Kaladin mistakes him for his little brother Tien. And when the boy dies, Kaladin declares himself dead inside. Just when things are at an all-time low, Syl, the windspren that has been following him, says that she can't watch this anymore, and leaves him. She was the last thing he had left. And for the first time in over a year, Kaladin begins to cry. This is rock bottom for Kaladin. Every time he tries to protect or help someone, he fails. So Kaladin decides to take his own life, but just when he has one foot over the void, Syl reappears and stops him. Syl knows what he is doing, so she tries to convince him of his honor and bravery. She says that he'd always find the young, untrained men and protect them, even though it put him in danger, and that this action is what drew her to him. Syl pleads with Kaladin to try one more time. He's done it before with lesser men, why not one more try? This is the first real hint of Syl's nature. We know that spren appear when intense emotions are felt or natural phenomena are present, like pain spren, rot spren, or wind spren, but Syl is drawn to Kaladin because of his honor. Through Syl's pleading, there stirs the tiniest fire of determination in Kaladin. After crying over the death of a boy he didn't even try to help, Kaladin casts his former self away, ridding himself of the helpless, depressing man he once was. Kaladin says that he died down at the chasm, and now the world has his vengeful spirit to deal with. Kaladin Stormblessed was dead, but Kaladin Bridgeman was of the same blood, so he takes ownership of Bridge 4. He vows to protect them, giving him the first sense of purpose he has felt in months. He wrapped himself in the responsibility he had taken. He held to it like a climber clung to his last handhold as he dangled from a cliffside. He would find a way to protect them. Kaladin also has flashbacks throughout the book, and in the first one we learn about his upbringing, where his dad was a trained surgeon who never required payment for his services. We also learn that Lyon, Kaladin's father, has been training him in medicine since he was a young boy. The first interlude follows a man named Ishik. Ishik lives in western Roshar in the Pure Lake, a giant body of water that is only calf deep. This is likely inspired by Utah Lake in the real world, since it's famously shallow, only getting about 14 feet at its deepest. Ishik's been employed now for about 5 months looking for a man named Hoyd. His employers are 3 men called Grump, Blunt, and Thinker. Although not mentioned in the book, Grump is Galadon from Elantris, Blunt is Bayon from Whitesand, and Thinker is Demu from Mistborn. The second interlude shows Non-Balat, Shallan's older brother, who is shown torturing small animals. Causing pain to them seems to lessen his own pain. He is interrupted by his brother Wickham, who says they have a big problem. This problem is the Ghostbloods, who I'll talk about later. The third interlude follows Szeth, giving us a deeper insight into his character. Szeth is from Shinovar, a place where people are shorter in stature and have large, almost disturbing eyes. In Szeth's culture, men who are disgraced from society are bound to an oathstone. Whoever has it has complete control over them. Even though he's a trained and extremely competent assassin, Szeth hates killing almost as much as he hates himself. In this chapter, Szeth's current master is a transient worker who likes to show off Szeth, but he is killed by a group of thugs who take the Oathstone, hence controlling Szeth. This is the first introduction to Dalinar, Adolin, Elhokar, Renarin, Sadeas, and the King's Wit. Adolin is the oldest son of Dalinar. He's about 21, with long blonde hair with streaks of black and light blue eyes. He is impulsive, charismatic, and a bit of a playboy. But Adolin is also intensely loyal and deeply cares about his family. Anytime someone insults Renarin or his father, Adolin lashes out in anger. He's even called Firebrand for his hot-headedness. Adolin is troubled by his father Dalinar's increasingly strange behavior, especially during high storms where he loses consciousness and has erratic visions. He constantly implores Dalinar to take action against those speaking out against their house, and wishes his father to be the violent, impassioned prince that got him the nickname Blackthorn. Dalinar Kholin is a man in his 50s, with short dark hair and light blue eyes. Dalinar has a complicated and dark history, but in this book, Dalinar is defined by his honor and righteousness. He is a man of extremes, and the only way for him to function properly is to dedicate his life to something. In this story, Dalinar dedicates his life to protecting his nephew the king, living by the codes, and learning what his visions are about. He cares little for the Vengeance Pact, a war that he started based on his brother Gavilar's death, a point that Sadeas constantly mocks him for. Sadeas is a high prince and political rival to the Kholin family. Although he fights on the same side as Dalinar, Sadeas is an evil, cunning man. He believes that honor, compassion, and diplomacy are signs of weakness. He also sees no moral issue with using bridge crews, like the one Kaladin is enslaved in, even though Dalinar finds them morally wrong to waste so many lives. They are all on a great hunt. Adolin questions Dalinar about the purpose and wisdom of their hunting expedition, particularly when it leaves the king open to a potential Parshendi ambush. Dalinar replies that a victory such as a successful hunt in a controlled, safe environment will bolster the king's reputation and increase his self-confidence as well. The king, Elhokar, is not like the other Kholins. He's not a righteous hero like his uncle Dalinar, nor a skilled swordsman like Adolin. He's not intellectual like Yasna, or personable like his mother Navani. Elhokar is a paranoid and deeply insecure king. Since his father's death, he constantly worries about assassins or plots to depose him. Renarin is Adolin's younger brother. He is smaller and not as formidable as Adolin, and his black hair with streaks of blonde is the opposite of his brother's. He also contrasts Adolin in other ways. While his brother is hot-headed and confident, Renarin is quiet and thoughtful. His pensiveness usually makes others uncomfortable. Adolin says that Renarin can't fight because of his blood weakness. This is later revealed to be a form of epilepsy. It's also suspected and confirmed by author Brandon Sanderson that Renarin is on the autism spectrum. He has a tendency to fidget and rarely smiles unless with his brother or close friends. Wit is also on the hunt. The king's wit is a jester of sorts, a sword or a tool maintained by the king. Insulting others was beneath the dignity of the king, so instead they use a jester to keep everybody honest. Adolin says that there is something different about this wit. He knows things that he shouldn't, important things, useful things. Adolin has given up on hiding things from Wit because he'll just find out eventually. It was impossible to keep anything from the man. Wit is, of course, Hoyd, author Brandon Sanderson's Easter egg in the form of a character. He shows up in every Cosmere novel, but he rarely makes such a significant presence like he does in the Stormlight books. Hoyd's true personality and backstory are still a mystery, but in this portrayal, he is intelligent and sharp-tongued, with a clear sense of superiority over other characters. At this point, the Kazanpine they are hunting appears, and instead of it being a controlled environment, the beast is massive, and the situation quickly becomes chaotic. Dalinar, Adolin, and Elhokar all begin to race for the Chasm Fiend, hoping to kill it before it can harm any bystanders. Sadeas characteristically stands from a distance and uses his grand bow, weakening the creature while Dalinar and Adolin go for its many legs. Elhokar tries to make a grand proclamation at the beast by yelling that he defies it. In so doing, the strap on Elhokar's saddle breaks and he is thrown to the ground. Just as Elhokar is about to be crushed by the Chasm Fiend, Dalinar hurls himself beneath its descending claw and with shard plate enhanced strength, catches the claw, giving Elhokar time to escape. This shows Dalinar's prowess on the battlefield that earned him the nickname Blackthorn. It says that other men thought they understood shard blades and plate, but Dalinar Kholin, at times, proved them all children. Adolin continues to cut off its legs, and the Chasm Fiend is eventually unable to support its own weight. Elhokar summons his shard blade once again and uses it to kill the felled creature, then harvests its gem heart. Kaladin is now determined to fight for a better existence. He tries to rouse a similar perseverance in his bridge crew by forcefully dragging them outside to train, however he's unable to inspire them by force. Determined to never lose another man, Kaladin uses a giant board to simulate carrying a bridge and hopes to inspire his men to live for something better. Syl informs Kaladin that she is changing, becoming better at remembering things and understanding new concepts and abstract ideas. Kaladin realizes that she feels much the way about her new understanding of life as he does about his current position, scared to go onward but terrified to go back to what you were. The current bridgemen include Rock, who's a loyal, emotional hulk of a man, Teft, who's older and thoughtful towards others but has a very low self-esteem, Sigzil, who's analytical and quiet, Moash, who's strong-willed and standoffish, and there's also Dunny, Leighton, Scar, Drehi, Dabid, Hobber, and many others. On the next bridge run, Kaladin forces himself into the front of the crew, the most dangerous position. One of the major themes in the Way of Kings is the responsibility of leadership. Dalinar even says that the in-world book Way of Kings is about how to be an honorable leader, and one of the pillars of this teaching is leading from the front. Dalinar leads from the front in his plateau assaults, Kaladin leads from the front in his bridge runs, and Sadeas, the main antagonist of the novel, leads from the back. Dalinar says that forcing people to follow you won't change their beliefs about you. Letting others choose to follow is the way of kings. When asked why Dalinar doesn't use bridge crews, his main reason is that the codes say the officer will require no action of his soldiers that he would not be willing to perform himself. The codes also say that the officer will not abandon allies on the field, foreshadowing Sadeas' betrayal. So Kaladin takes Rock's spot in the front. He also bribes and intimidates their squad leader Gaz into letting him carry wounded back from the battle. With Kaladin's history as a surgeon's apprentice, he knows the basics of treating most of the injured men. Most just need antiseptic, something the military won't sell to bridgemen. So Kaladin, Rock, and Teft all begin secretly milking sap from knobweed and using it to treat the wounded men. A few days later, Bridge 4 is tasked with chasm duty, a job that involves climbing into the chasms to scavenge off the dead washed up by the high storm. It's a dangerous and dishonorable job where the bridgemen could be swept away by a high storm or attacked by a chasm fiend. While down in the chasm, Kaladin picks up a spear. Holding the weapon sends him back to his days as a spearman in Amriam's army. Since most of the others are busy, Kaladin performs a spear exercise called a kata. It says that strength surged through him. His body moved of its own accord, going through the form he trained in so frequently. The spear danced in his fingers, comfortable, an extension of himself. He spun with it, swinging it around and around across his neck, over his arm, in and out of jabs and swings. All the men in Bridge 4 are speechless. Teft says that he's seen katas before, but never one like that. He even says that it was beautiful. With this, Kaladin's new approach to leadership has slowly started to change the hearts of his fellow bridgemen. They even have Rock make them soup around a fire and have Dunny sing for them. After the Chasm Fiend attack, Dalinar and Adolin are tasked with investigating the broken strap on Elhokar's saddle. Since Elhokar is obsessed with the idea that everyone is trying to kill him, he decides that Dalinar and Adolin aren't taking the matter seriously enough, so he names Sadeas High Prince of Information to investigate the incident. Sadeas and Dalinar argue in front of the king regarding the war that they are currently fighting against the Parshendi. Sadeas sees the war as most Alethi men do, a contest. They've mostly forgotten the reason they started fighting was to avenge Dalinar's brother and Elhokar's father, Gavilar. But when gem hearts got involved, it changed the war. Chasm fiends are ginormous beasts that live in the Shattered Plains. They come to the top of the plateaus to pupate, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, where they are harmless. The animals have giant gem hearts in their bodies that the army carves out on a plateau assault. When Sadeas mocks Dalinar, Adolin cuts in by yelling at Sadeas, telling him that his father is one of the most renowned warriors in Alethkar, and then begins to call Sadeas a coward before he is cut off by his father. This is when Sadeas almost takes things too far. Throughout the novel, Sadeas constantly belittles and prods Dalinar for not being the man he once was. He even mocks Dalinar's children. One son can barely control himself, and the other is incompetent. The firebrand I can understand, but Renarin is useless. When Dalinar calmly, through gritted teeth, reminds Sadeas of the implications of openly mocking his sons, Sadeas retracts his statement, saying, "You did hear the wrong words. That would not have been wise of me." But he doesn't apologize, even adding that this particular discussion between Dalinar and him will never be done, at least until he relearns to act as a man should. Later, Dalinar begins trying to unite the High Princes. He wants to take the sport out of hunting gem hearts and instead try to end the war. Most of the High Princes don't actually care about avenging Gavilar's death. All of the other High Princes either make excuses for not joining him or outright deny his proposal. On their way back to camp, Dalinar and Renarin get warning that a high storm is about to start. They hide in the barracks as Dalinar slowly slips into a vision. As the vision begins, Dalinar finds himself in a barn fighting off hound-like creatures that turn out to be something called Midnight Essence. We don't know much about Midnight Essence as of now. Fans speculate that it's some form of corrupt investiture that gains sentience, but we won't know until later entries in the Cosmere. He's also visited by two soldiers in Shardplate who claim to be Knights Radiant, and they invite him to a place called Uruthiru. Then the woman Dalinar is protecting begins to speak in a deep voice, the same one he's heard in other visions, and one he suspects could be the Almighty. The voice tells him to unite them, and that he should continue to trust Sadeas. Dalinar's vision ends, and he wakes up next to Renarin where he was before the high storm started. At a feast, Navani arrives at the Shattered Plains. Navani is Yasna and Elhokar's mother. She is a woman in her 50s with light purple eyes and dark hair. She is widely regarded as one of the most beautiful women in Alethkar. She is also very personable. Dalinar says that no matter where she travels, Navani will learn everything of significance through gossip. Dalinar is both captivated and intimidated by Navani. To hide his attraction, Dalinar forces himself to call her sister. Every time he spoke with Navani, he felt as if he was facing a predator of the most dangerous breed. Dalinar and Adolin discuss Sadeas' plotting, and while Dalinar insists that they should trust Sadeas because of the voice in his visions, Adolin snaps at him. He yells at his father and chastises him for betting the future of their house on these visions. Adolin's frustration with Dalinar boils over, and he blames the visions on Dalinar's mind not working right. Adolin knows that he's taking it too far, but his impulsiveness hasn't yet settled. Adolin shouts at Dalinar that his visions are just a figment of his imagination. Dalinar tells Adolin to leave. Adolin continues to try to convince himself that he did the right thing, but it didn't make him feel any less sick about having to be the one who said it. Later, a chasm fiend is spotted, and in an attempt to increase the morale of his men, especially Adolin, and to dispel any rumors that he is weak, Dalinar decides to run a plateau assault. Just as they are about to leave, Sadeas joins them on their hunt, claiming the king's writ of passage for investigating the broken strap. Everyone is unhappy about it, especially Adolin. Sadeas continues his mocking and prodding by telling Dalinar that it's odd how a leader's influence can affect his men. So many of these are like smaller versions of you, bundles of emotion wrapped up and tied until they become stiff from the pressure. They're so sure in some ways, yet so insecure in others. But Dalinar keeps his cool, instead telling Sadeas that a man's emotions are what define him, and control is the hallmark of true strength. To lack feeling is to be dead, but to act on every feeling is to be a child. Sadeas only sees this as an invitation to continue belittling Dalinar, which eventually sees Dalinar lose his temper. Dalinar and Adolin lead from the front in full shard plates, and their feud seems to be behind them at the moment, as Adolin recognizes Dalinar taking action to uphold the dignity of their house. Dalinar tries to lose himself in the thrill of battle. He tries to resurface the killing machine that he was in his youth, but Dalinar doesn't want to be a reckless killer, and for the first time, he suppresses the thrill. Suddenly, he is disgusted with the death and blood. How could a man enjoy this? He reels back into a protective stance, guarding his son and the rest of their men. The Parshendi retreat, and the Kholin army wins the Gemheart. Just as they are leaving, they spot the Parshendi Shardbearer. Dalinar questions why the Shardbearer arrived so late. We'll find out later that that particular Shardbearer wants to talk to Dalinar. Dalinar has a lot on his mind, so he starts smashing rocks in Shardplate. He actually does this for several hours before being interrupted by Navani. She tells him that she is fascinated by his recent change. Navani reveals that all those years ago when she was forced to pick between Dalinar or Gavilar, she chose his brother because Dalinar frightened her. He was too intense for her. She also says that his intensity is still in there. I can see it in your eyes, but you've wrapped your armor around it, a glistening set of shardplate to contain it. That is what I find fascinating. Dalinar then receives a span read from Yasna, and they talk secretly about Yasna's research. Span reads are Roshar's version of email. Span reads are made by capturing a spren inside a ruby and splitting it in half. The two halves are then embedded in reed pens, and the two pens can then mimic the movement of the other exactly. Navani is perplexed by Dalinar and Yasa's relationship, as most people universally revile her. Navani compares them both to a pair of nails in the same doorframe, stern, hard, and annoying to pull free. Dalinar then tells Navani that he's going to abdicate his position as High Prince in favor of Adolin. She tells him that this is a terrible mistake. Growing up, Kaladin was often bullied for being the son of a surgeon. Other boys in the town challenge him to duels they'll know Kaladin will lose. After a few beatings from other children, Kaladin's competitiveness begins to show as he starts asking to be taught, and he wants to become a soldier to prove himself. Later, we see him use his surgeon knowledge to try to help a girl who was injured. The girl unexpectedly dies, but Kaladin's father tells him that he did a great job and that he'll make an excellent surgeon. Kaladin is deeply troubled that he couldn't save the girl, and he sobs along with the girl's father. The city lord of Hearthstone dies while under Lyron's care. He was an old man who left a great deal of money for Lyron to educate Kaladin under professionals in Kharbranth. A new city lord arrives in Hearthstone, and when Kaladin's father tries to welcome him, Rashon blames Lyron for killing the old city lord and stealing his money, and for Rashon being stuck in a backwater town like Hearthstone. Risen is a Thaylen merchant who travels to Shinovar with her master of Estim. This chapter is mostly for world-building the western part of Roshar, where there aren't any spren and the terrain isn't affected by high storms. It's implied that Risen's master of Estim was the merchant who bought Szeth before he murdered King Gavilar. Axes the Collector is a Sia Amian, a race of people with pale blue skin who write notes on their bodies. Axes is trying to document every kind of spren, so he gets drunk and subsequently hungover to try to evoke an intoxication spren or something similar. We haven't seen him or this race of people show up in the later Cosmere entries, so we don't know much about his background or purpose in the story yet. The sixth interlude returns to Szeth as his current master is killed again, and he's assigned to a new master. Szeth is horrified to discover that he is now being commanded to kill some of the most important people in the world, and that his new master seems to understand his true potential. Kaladin has finally gained the trust and respect of Bridge 4. Now, his biggest task is to keep them alive. He instructs them to practice a new way to carry the bridge, hoisting it on its side, working different muscles, in hopes of being more energy efficient. It doesn't work very well, but Kaladin has a different idea in mind. The squad leader Gaz encourages Kaladin to try the side carry on a bridge run. Gaz is under orders to see Kaladin dead. Although he can't kill him openly, he tries other options to see Bridge 4 fail. To make things hard on Bridge 4, Gaz only gives them one new recruit. Kaladin picks a smiling, cheery Herdazian man with one arm named Lopin. Bridge 4 is immediately called on a bridge run, and since the army is arriving late, it means devastation for the bridge crews. Resolute to not lose a man, Kaladin commands Bridge 4 to use the side carry, using the bridge as a giant shield to block the Parshendi's arrows. And it works perfectly. Not a single member of Bridge 4 is hit with an arrow, and at first it looks like an overwhelming success, except when the other bridge crews see it, they try to emulate it, and without the training that Bridge 4 has, it's a disaster. The bridges don't get set, the soldiers get fired upon, and Sadeas' army takes massive losses. They lose the battle, and Sadeas kills the light-eyed man in charge of the bridge crews. Kaladin is then beaten. Kaladin wakes up upside down, strung up near their camp. Sadeas says that he's letting the Stormfather judge him. No one survives judgment from the Stormfather. It's a public execution to scare others from killing or stealing. Bridge 4 gives Kaladin mournful nods, but Kaladin says, "I want you to go back into the barracks and tell the men to come out after the storm. Tell them to look at me tied here. Tell them I'll open my eyes and look back at them, and they'll know that I survived. Tell them I chose not to take my own life, and there's no way in damnation I'm going to give it up to Sadeas." The storm hits Kaladin like a truck, and he's nearly knocked unconscious. With the storm's powerful wind buffeting him, his body is like a kite, flapping uncontrollably. His only companion is Syl, giving him advice from a different perspective as the storm attacks. She even tries to slow the wind by standing in front of him, hands forward. Kaladin also sees a giant face in the storm, who he thinks could be the Stormfather. After the high storm ends, members of Bridge 4 rush out to see Kaladin hanging, and after several worrying moments, Kaladin's eyes open. He survived. Throughout the book so far, spheres have been losing their stormlight near Kaladin. It's hinted a few times, and this is when other characters notice it. High storms are meant to infuse spheres so they regain their stormlight. Kaladin has a sphere with him in the high storm, but after, it's completely drained. Kaladin appears to be drawing stormlight from the spheres, and in this case, it seems to be helping him live. Tefta notices this and starts putting infused spheres near Kaladin when he sleeps, and again the stormlight is drained. Teft even sees cuts and bruises heal automatically, a symbol of the Knights Radiant. In the next few weeks, Kaladin heals and contemplates what Gaz told him about how bridgemen aren't supposed to survive. Kaladin, Rock, and Sigil finally realize that bridgemen act as distractions to draw arrows from the more important soldiers. Slaves are much more disposable and much easier to train than soldiers. Kaladin's hopelessness gradually returns, and he begins to revert to the wretched state he was in just a few weeks ago. With a new Light Eyes in charge of the bridge crews, Bridge 4 is designated to permanent chasm duty. Kaladin shrugs off attempts at finding hope now that he knows what bridgemen are for. He says, "I don't know what to do. If we try to protect ourselves, Sadeas will have us punished. We're bait and we're going to die. There's nothing I can do about it. It's hopeless." The other bridgemen hate seeing Kaladin like this. He was the one that saved them from their hopelessness, so some of them feel responsible for helping him. Teft, of all people, tells Kaladin that it's pathetic to give up now, and even says life before death. Teft knows that Kaladin could be the new coming of the Knights Radiant, so he uses their motto to try to convince him. Syl says something similar. Doesn't the fight mean anything? Their attempts to cheer him up slowly begin to work, and Kaladin binds himself to the phrase, life before death, he repeats in his mind. And now he slowly emerges from the wretch with a new idea. He would value his life, and not let Sadeas take it. So they plan an escape. Kaladin begins to have strange dreams where he is flying over Roshar, seeing lands he didn't know existed. He even confirms with the world traveler Sigil that these places actually exist. He also has a dream of the Almighty warning him about someone called Odium. He also sees himself visiting his parents, and they are shocked to see their son in his current state. This could be foreshadowing when Kaladin visits his family in the third book. Kaladin continues to contemplate his plan. Escaping through the chasm would be a death sentence, and if they were to run away from Sadeas' camp, they'd have to bribe or fight some of the watchmen, and the High Prince would likely send out groups of soldiers to track them down if they did escape. Kaladin goes on a walk, talking with Syl, and sees Adolin Kholin in a confrontation with some of Sadeas' soldiers. They believe they shouldn't have to pay a whore, so they beat her in public. So Adolin summons his Shardblade to protect the woman, scaring the soldiers off. Kaladin is amazed that a light-eyed man could show the slightest hint of honor. He concludes that Adolin probably had a selfish motive, but can't convince himself. Bridge 4 returns to the chasms, this time with a new member, Shen, a docile parshman who doesn't speak or really do anything. Kaladin begins training all the men in the way of the spear, teaching them stances and jabs and how to act on the battlefield. The chapter is called To Care because that's the heart of Kaladin's message. He says that men shouldn't be mindless brutes, lacking humanity, that they should care about their craft, about others, and about life. Rock says that fighting is beneath him, so he won't join. Kaladin becomes immensely proud with Bridge 4, saying that Sadeas accidentally gave him the best soldiers he's ever trained. By seeking to beat them down, Sadeas had prepared them to excel. The story returns to Shallan's perspective as she and Jasnah study philosophy and the death of Jasnah's father, King Gavilar. The Parshendi claimed responsibility for his murder, but they still haven't been able to uncover the true motive. Their talk is interrupted by the old king, Taravangian. Taravangian is in his 70s. He has wispy white hair and light green eyes. He also has a complicated and mysterious history, but I'll save that for a later video. Taravangian asks Shallan to draw him. Shallan says that she'd be happy to, but as she is drawing, she slips into her trance-like state, letting her fingers draw on their own accord, and when the trance ends, she sees an image of the king with two dark figures behind him. Shallan unknowingly drew two creatures that she'd never seen. In a panic, she crumbles up the piece of paper and tries again. Later, Capsule continues his visits, bringing bread and jam for Shallan. The two flirt often, and Capsule even mentions leaving the Ardentia to be with Shallan. Jasnah continues to study the creatures called Voidbringers and a place called Uruthiru. We saw Uruthiru in Dalinar's visions, and the ancient city will come into play in the later books. Shallan struggles with the morality of her task to steal the Soulcaster. She even has a chance to steal it while Jasnah is bathing, but can't bring herself to do it. Jasnah's kindness towards Shallan and the enjoyment of real scholarly work makes Shallan's task all the more dreadful. Jasnah decides to show Shallan philosophy in action by taking her to the most dangerous part of town where murderers often congregate. Shallan is terrified and insists that they leave immediately. But Jasnah tempts the criminals by showing off her wealth and vulnerability, and when the criminals inevitably attack the women, Jasnah soulcasts all four of them, killing them instantly. A major theme in the Stormlight Archive is the value of human life, and this includes the moral dilemma of whether the act of taking a life can ever be justified if it serves to protect and save others. Kaladin's father says that there are those who save lives and those who take lives, but Kaladin always said that he was in the middle, taking lives to save them. Dalinar won't use bridge crews because sacrificing their lives isn't worth killing a few more Parshendi warriors. The entire Alethi Parshendi war is based on this too. The Vengeance Pact started to avenge the death of one man, although tens of thousands have died in the war. Shallan calls Jasnah a murderer, saying it was one of the most awful things she'd ever experienced. Jasnah argues that she just saved countless lives by ridding the world of these men, and asks, is it possible to do something horrible in the name of something wonderful? Shallan argues that by tempting them, Jasnah was looking for an excuse to kill the men, and Jasnah argues that she doesn't deserve evil done to her just because she walked down the wrong alley. Shallan isn't immune to this dilemma either. She wants to steal the Soulcaster to help her family. You could say it's something horrible in the name of something wonderful. Taravangian, who eventually becomes the main villain of the series, kills kings to make Roshar a better place. He says that he is the monster that will save this world. Most of the main characters in this series have a viewpoint on this topic, and it typically says whether they are good or evil in the eyes of the other characters. Amaram, Moash, and Taravangian all believe they are making the world a better place by killing, but it's not just limited to the villains. Jasnah and Shallan have both killed people for different reasons and under different circumstances, but the underlying truth is that it's impossible to say their actions are purely evil or purely righteous. It challenges the reader to question the value of human life and to see other perspectives on a complicated issue. One of Brandon Sanderson's most famous quotes is that the purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you what to think, but to give you questions to think upon. After seeing Jasnah murder the criminals, Shallan's moral dilemma of stealing the Soulcaster vanishes, and she decides that Jasnah doesn't deserve to have such a holy weapon if she's going to use it for murder, so Shallan steals it. Now that Shallan has the Soulcaster, her next task is to get it home. She knows that leaving right away would make her look suspicious, so she stays for the time being. She also needs to learn how to use the Soulcaster. She reads books and accounts of people using it, but it turns out to be much harder than she suspected. Nothing seems to work. Shallan has an afternoon with Capsule, where the two flirt obnoxiously over bread and jam. The conversation changes to talk about Jasnah's Soulcaster. Capsule talks about how easy it is to use one, although Shallan rebukes this by saying it's much more difficult than people think. Capsule admits that the Ardentia greatly desires such a holy weapon, but that King Elhokar would likely start a war over a stolen Soulcaster, which only adds to Shallan's anxiety. Capsule also ducks near a bush to hide from Taravangian. Capsule isn't really in the Ardentia. Taravangian would know this, so he hides from the old man, but tells Shallan he's scrapping his day's work to spend time with her. Shallan still can't get the Soulcaster to work. She spends time in the library reading about it and practices different hums and rhythms, but to no avail. Everybody says soulcasting is easy, so it doesn't make sense that Shallan can't get this one to work. She speculates that Jasnah had a broken Soulcaster too, and that's why she hasn't noticed that Shallan stole it. But she also saw Jasnah use it twice, so that wouldn't make sense. Shallan continues to research and draw in her free time, except every time she draws, strange symbol-headed creatures emerge in her drawings. Capsule continues to visit her with more bread and jam, showing a romantic interest that Shallan doesn't wholeheartedly reciprocate. Finally, Capsule says that he will leave the Ardentia to be with Shallan, but Shallan finally voices her lack of affection for Capsule and tells him that she is leaving, returning to her homeland to help her family. Capsule seems cold at the admission, but asks Shallan to draw him. She's made sketches for everyone else, but not him. As Shallan finishes the drawing, she notices that she's included a figure in the background standing behind Capsule that has an outline of a body, but some sort of symbol in the place of where its head should be. Shallan feels she is losing her mind. She runs from the room, away from Capsule and Jasnah. As she waits for the lift to take her down, she takes a memory of Capsule standing in the doorway, looking after her, and quickly sketches it, only to see more symbol heads above him. Shallan seems to be haunted by something, and there's mention of a terrible act that Shallan committed. She shudders every time she thinks of it. Shallan runs to her room, and when she gets there, she hears an uncanny, small voice say, "What are you?" Suddenly, the bedroom transforms around her. She found herself in a place with a black sky and a strange, small white sun that hung on the horizon too far away. There's an ocean of beads and a fiery sky. As we'll learn in the later books, this is the cognitive realm where Spren come from. Although mentioned fleetingly in this book, the chapter is called Shadesmar, which is the term Rosharans use for it. Shallan screams as she falls in the ocean of beads. Then, she is suddenly transported back to her room, and as she realizes what's happening, she accidentally soulcasts a goblet into blood. After weeks of failing to get the Soulcaster to work, Shallan's trip-like experience into Shadesmar allowed her to use the device. However, Jasnah is knocking on the door, and if she enters, she will know that Shallan has her Soulcaster. To prevent a puddle of blood looking suspicious, Shallan grabs a piece of broken glass and cuts her arm, making it look like a suicide attempt. Shallan wakes up in one of Taravangian's hospitals. She can't leave because they think she is still at risk of self-harm. Jasnah walks in and actually apologizes to Shallan. In overworking her, Jasnah might have done the world a disservice and stolen from it one of the great scholars of the rising generation. Since Jasnah believes it's her fault for Shallan's supposed suicide attempt, Shallan sees it as the perfect excuse to go home with the stolen Soulcaster. Capsule makes another appearance, characteristically bringing bread and jam. This time, he has a new kind of jam, strawberries. He encourages Shallan to eat the jam, growing increasingly insistent, but when she opens the jar and smells it, the jam is disgusting, smelling like vinegar and slime. Capsule is alarmed and forces down some of the jam himself before stumbling out of the room and falling to the floor. Shallan runs after him, but starts to feel dizzy. Jasnah cries out that Shallan has been poisoned. She yells for someone to bring her the soulcaster because she's going to soulcast Shallan's blood to cleanse it. Shallan knows that if Jasnah can't soulcast, then she'll die, so she shows Jasnah the stolen soulcaster in her pouch. Then she passes out. Jasnah is deeply disappointed in Shallan, but she agrees to let Shallan live and return home. She also explains that Capsule is dead. He ate the bread that he had laced with backbreaker poison, but without the jam as antidote, he had no chance to survive. Jasnah says that he was playing Shallan the entire time. Throughout the book, Jasnah has mentioned that she has many enemies, and that ardents, criminals, and all kinds of men are trying to steal her soulcaster and probably kill her. It's not a baseless paranoia like Elhokar feels. She has one of the most powerful and holy devices in the world, not to mention most people revile Jasnah. For a moment, Shallan hopes that she can get Jasnah to explain the strange things she saw, but her mentor's cold rage dissuades her, and Shallan accepts her fate. In Kaladin's flashbacks, we see how the town has reacted to the new city lord. Roshone has called Kaladin's father a thief for stealing the former lord's money after he died, even though Lyon says that Wistia gave him the money for Kaladin's education. Kaladin begins to think for himself in the later flashbacks. At first, he wants to be a soldier like everyone else. Then he wants to be a surgeon for his family. Earlier, Kaladin believed his father to be a pushover, letting everyone walk all over him, even though they desperately needed him. But late at night, many of the townspeople come to their house and demand Lyon return the spheres that Wistia gave him. Lyon lashes out at the people, calling them cowards and hypocrites because he's helped heal and care for many of them. The city lord Roshone continues to prohibit people from paying Lyon, so Kaladin's family begins to run out of food. Kaladin and Lyon have a meeting with Roshone, where Kaladin sees his father stand up to the light-eyed man, and we learn that Lyon actually did steal the spheres from Wistia. He knew that his family would likely be out of money, so he took the initiative on his own. In the next flashback, Roshone and his son Relir get horribly wounded while hunting white spines. Kaladin and Lyon have to work under intense pressure to save them. When Lyon sees Relir's injuries, he instructs Kaladin to focus on saving Roshone, since Relir will die regardless. While operating on him, Lyon has a chance to cut Roshone's femoral artery. It would kill Roshone instantly, but Lyon doesn't do it. He tells Kaladin that not saving Roshone would have been the same as killing him. Then Lyon says something that fortifies Kaladin's character into the man he would eventually become by the end of the novel. He says that Light Eyes don't care about life, so I must. Lyon's training has taught Kaladin to be calm under pressure and to be apathetic to the death and gore that surgeons see. All this time that Lyon has been preparing Kaladin to be a surgeon, he's accidentally preparing him to be a cold, heartless killer. He sees the insides of men, sees how easy it is to let them die. At that moment, Kaladin knew he could kill. The town gathers for the arrival of High Marshal Amaram. He is recruiting soldiers for his border disputes. Since Kaladin and Lyon are essential workers, they are safe from being drafted. So Roshone insists that Kaladin's little brother Tien be drafted. Roshone believes that Kaladin and Lyon killed his son, and that this is his way of getting back at them. Kaladin tries to take Tien's place, but Roshone won't allow it. So Kaladin says that he'll go anyway, to protect Tien. Tien is terrified, and is immensely grateful that Kaladin joins him. "Thank you," he says. "Thank you, Kaladin. Thank you." The next flashback is the most recent one, taking place where the first chapter of the book ended. Kaladin is a squad leader in Amram's army, and we finally see the events that led to him becoming a slave. Kaladin's squad is attacked by a full shardbearer. The shardbearer tramples Kaladin's men, killing almost every member. While Amaram and his light-eyed patrol all run from the shardbearer, Kaladin fights to avenge his squad. The shardbearer is about to kill Amaram, but Kaladin stabs his leg, causing the shardbearer to stumble. He charges again, only to have the head of his spear sliced off by the shardblade. Kaladin sees a flash of light and grabs the falling spearhead out of the air. He spins and slams the spearhead into the shardbearer's face through his visor. The shardbearer falls and drops his shardblade to the ground. He had killed a shardbearer. The flash of light is probably the first appearance of Syl. Since Kaladin is protecting several soldiers, it makes sense that she would appear. The shardblade rests stabbed into the ground. Koreb, one of Kaladin's few remaining squadmates, tell him to take it, but Kaladin refuses. Kaladin can't take up the sword for fear of changing into a Light Eyes, something he spent his entire life despising. He also can't justify taking up the blade that has killed so many of his friends and so many others in the past. Amaram is aghast that Kaladin doesn't take the blade. Kaladin simply says, "I don't want it." I'm giving it to my men," then walks away. Later, Amram meets with Kaladin and the 4 remaining members of his squad. He insists on knowing why Kaladin won't take the shards, but since he doesn't want to offend Amram, Kaladin doesn't give him a straight answer. So Amram murders the remaining members of Kaladin's squad in cold blood. Amram believes that it is in the best interest of Alethkar to have the shards for himself. He says that I am trained in the sword and accustomed to plate. It will serve Alethkar best if I bear the shards. He does feel guilty about this, so in exchange for saving his life, he spares Kaladin, branding him a slave and selling him off. The Baxil interlude mostly serves as an introduction to the Night Watcher, a sentient spren that grants any boon but takes something in return. Dalinar is said to have visited the Night Watcher, as well as other characters in the later books. Baxil is talking about the Night Watcher while working for a mysterious woman who has the features of Shin, Alethi, and Makabaki. Her beauty is almost inhuman. This person is later revealed to be one of the 10 heralds, Shalash. Garanid is an ardent, studying spren in eastern Roshar. There's a scene where a flame spren reacts to being measured. The chapter illustrates a relationship between Shadesmar and Roshar, and it also hints at breaths from Warbreaker. Szeth is tasked with killing the king of Yakoved. We see Szeth actually crying while he kills the king's men. Szeth constantly mentions his self-hatred, and even hopes that someone will eventually be skilled enough to kill him. Szeth even kills 2 shardbearers, showing just how lethal the assassin in white really is. Adolin blames himself for Dalinar's decision to abdicate. He believes that if he had not lashed out at his father, calling him crazy, none of this would have happened. Adolin says, "My point was never to get you to abdicate. I just didn't want you relying upon the delusions to make decisions about our house's future," the main decision being trusting Sadeas. Renarin suggests proving that the visions are in fact hallucinations by having historians and scholars validate Dalinar's visions. Navani is the most trustworthy person they know, so they get her to record the visions to see if places Dalinar sees during the visions are actually real. Once Adolin and Renarin leave, Navani corners Dalinar. She's loved him for a while, and they are both aware of their feelings for one another, but Dalinar insists that he will not dishonor his brother's memory, and he says that there are rules and people would talk. In The Way of Kings, Dalinar's character arc is about his uncertainty as a leader. At the beginning of the book, he's ashamed of his past and insecure about his moral compass, so he tries to right it by following the codes, the only thing that gives him stability. And by denying Navani's affection based on rules and optics, his uncertainty of himself reaches its peak. So he tells her to leave him, and that a relationship between the two of them will never happen. At a feast, Wit gives Dalinar a foreboding message telling him that Sadeas is planning a revelation. Dalinar sends for Adolin to prepare the most loyal men in case Sadeas tries to move against them. But Sadeas surprises them by announcing that indeed the strap on Elhokar's saddle was cut, but not by Dalinar. Adolin and Dalinar are shocked that Sadeas didn't use this investigation to plot against them, but he seems genuine. So Dalinar pleads with Sadeas to ally with him on the Plateau Assault so they can end the war. As shown earlier in the book, none of the High Princes really want the war to end. The profit from the gem hearts fills the pockets of the wealthy, and it's mentioned that if they weren't fighting the Parshendi, they would just start a war with someone else. So it's even more of a shock when Sadeas agrees to ally with Dalinar. Paired with rejecting Navani, this is the peak of Dalinar's failure in this book. He is easily manipulated by Sadeas because the visions told him to trust him against the wishes of his greatest ally, Adolin, and he rejects genuine affection from the woman he's loved for most of his life based on how others would view it. He follows the codes because he's unsure how to lead without them. Dalinar and Sadeas start their joint plateau assaults, and at first, it goes well. Dalinar believes that they could finally wipe out the Parshendi, end the war, and return home. The Parshendi seem to notice this, so they start sending a second army to some of the assaults. In one assault, Sadeas is cornered by hundreds of Parshendi, and Dalinar unleashes the beast within to save his old friend. Dalinar saves him, but feels disgusted with himself for recklessly killing so many Parshendi soldiers. When Sadeas asks him why he did that, he replies that you do not abandon your allies on the battlefield, not unless there's no recourse. It's one of the codes. And Sadeas says that honor of yours is going to get you killed, Dalinar. Adolin is at a wine tasting with many of the other princes in the kingdom. They gossip about the war and the king, and talk eventually turns to the Kholin family in Dalinar's visions. Adolin stands up for his family, as usual, and actually changes his mind about his father. He says that every time I forget how amazing my father is, he does something to prove me one of the 10 fools. It happened when Elhokar was in danger too. My father only acts like that when he really cares about something, and that the lives of Elhokar and Sadeas might be more important than killing Parshendi. The scene shifts to Dalinar, Sadeas, and Elhokar watching the dueling matches. Dalinar tells them the story of Noadan, the author of the in-world book Way of Kings, and how he traveled across the world to experience what it was like to be a common person traveling such a great distance. Sadeas calls the story ridiculous, noting that Dalinar only likes it because he likes to taunt his self-righteousness. Dalinar says that the real point of the story is that no good can come from false means, and that the journey is more important than the destination. It says that, and so, does the destination matter, or is it the path we take? I declare that no accomplishment has substance nearly as great as the road used to achieve it. We are not creatures of destinations. It is the journey that shapes us. Conversation turns to talk of abandoning the war and returning home. Elhokar questions why Dalinar keeps bringing up the subject. Dalinar explains his stance by saying, I would leave, but not because I wish to flee or fear battle. It would be because I fear for Alethkar's stability. Leaving this war would help secure our homeland and the loyalty of the High Princess. I would send envoys and scholars to find out why the Parshendi killed Gavilar. To satisfy Elhokar, he also says that perhaps they could kill the leader of the Parshendi as payment for killing Gavilar. Elhokar actually considers Dalinar's proposal. This is instrumental in Sadeas' later betrayal because his reasoning stems from Dalinar's influence on Elhokar. Bridge 4 is on another run, and again, arrows barely miss Kaladin, one even slicing his cheek. Dunny, the timid but talented singer, who is one of the first to embrace Kaladin as their leader, is brutally killed on this run. Kaladin blames himself, just like he's done for every other person he couldn't save. Later, during the assault, an injured man from a different bridge crew crawls towards Bridge 4. Since most of the other bridge crews openly mock Bridge 4, and they're short on supplies as it is, the men are wary about helping him. But Kaladin cares for the man anyway, saying, who cares for them? Not Sadeas, not their fellow bridgemen. I doubt even the heralds themselves spare a thought for these. I won't stand there and watch while my men die. We have to be better than that. We can't look away like the Light Eyes, pretending we don't see. This man is one of us, just like Dunny was. The Light Eyes talk about honor. They spout empty claims about their nobility. Well, I've only known one man in my life who was a true man of honor. He was a surgeon who would help anyone, even those who hated him, especially those who hated him. Well, we're going to show Gaz and Sadeas and any other sodden fool who cares to watch what he taught me. Kaladin's cut on his cheek is gone. Short on money and supplies, the bridgemen come up with a new way to keep the spheres they find during chasm duty. They get rocked to shoot arrows at the underside of a permanent bridge. During a bridge run, Lopen hangs back and collects the goods, which allows them to save money for when they escape. Kaladin still has strange things happening to him. He appears to accidentally absorb stormlight from spheres, and the other men even notice him glowing. Then he accidentally binds a pouch to a barrel. So now Kaladin has drained several spheres of stormlight, healed magically, and stuck something to something else. Syl called herself Bindspren in the past, and all of these weird things started happening when she showed up, so Kaladin offhandedly wonders if she is involved somehow. Taft is convinced that Kaladin is a Windrunner, an order of the Knights Radiant, but that wouldn't make sense since they all died thousands of years ago. Kaladin goes on a walk to process these strange things happening to him. He runs into Wit, who is playing a flute by a fire. Wit tells Kaladin the story of the Wondersail, a legendary ship whose crew were trying to uncover the truth about the Voidbringers. The story is about the island nation where the ship lands. The people on this island executed any person who broke even the smallest rule, and blamed it in the name of their emperor. When they discovered that the emperor had been dead for 10 years, the responsibility of the executions now falls on the people. The moral of the story is that Kaladin needs to stop taking responsibility for the deaths that aren't his fault. It was selfish to put the responsibility of the bridgemen's lives solely on himself. Instead, he decides to protect them because they deserve to be protected. The Light Eyes in charge of bridge crews still want Kaladin and the rest of Bridge 4 dead. So they force them on every bridge run possible with no breaks, and they still have them complete chasm duty even if it's at night. Time is running out. Eventually, the Light Eyes will find a way to kill Bridge 4. Kaladin starts cutting off the armor of Parshendi corpses. It's part of their flesh, so the process is sickening, but not for a surgeon. The Parshman Shen has to be held down while the bridge crew does this. Parshman and Parshendi are extremely protective of their dead. Knowing this, Kaladin gets an idea. Kaladin gets the armor in a bag and binds small rocks to the wall to climb up to tie it underneath a permanent bridge in the same way they've been sneaking out money. Once he gets to the top, Kaladin realizes he doesn't have a good way to get down. Syl tells him to fall and that he'll be okay. He's terrified, but he listens. He falls 40 feet to the ground, and although his heart lurches to his stomach, his body is totally fine. On the next run, Kaladin wears the Parshendi armor and runs ahead of the bridge crews to distract the enemy. Since Parshendi consider it a dire sin to disturb their dead, the archers focus all of their attention on Kaladin, shooting as often as they can. Kaladin inhales stormlight and dodges between the arrows, which bounce off his shield and armor. The speed and agility granted to him by the stormlight feels like the natural capacity that his body had long yearned for. One arrow catches his arm, but the wound leaks stormlight and begins to heal immediately. Another flight of arrows threatens to take his life, but he watches in awe as they change course in midair to strike his shield instead. It was wondrous. I was a storm, he says. He had lashed his shield without knowing what he was doing, something that he realizes he must have been doing for years. Lashing alters the gravitational bond between objects. In essence, he created a magnet for arrows. This explains why he was able to survive so many bridge runs when everybody else died. Miraculously, every Bridge 4 member survived this assault. Kaladin goes into shock after performing his stunt. He again mentions his duty to protect Bridge 4 and the influence his father has had on him. Overcome your guilt, care, but not too much. Take responsibility, don't blame yourself. Protect, save, help, but know when to give up. There's such precarious ledges. How do I do it, he asks. While exhausted and still recovering, Kaladin hears Lopen worriedly call his name. He looks up to see 50 Parshendi archers standing on the other side of the chasm, still intent on killing Kaladin and his men for disrespecting their dead. Kaladin begins screaming, no, no, no. He can't do anything to stop it. He's helpless. Everything he's worked so hard for is about to be lost. Suddenly, Dalinar Kholin crashes into the Parshendi, saving all the bridgemen. Dalinar raises his sword to salute the bridgemen, and again, Kaladin doesn't believe that a light-eyed man would actually try to save them, and decides that Dalinar probably just had an opportunity to wipe out some of the Parshendi, although Kaladin can't quite convince himself. Dalinar decides to rescind his abdication. With everything going on, he thinks now would be a bad time. This is the first step Dalinar takes toward becoming the man he is by the end of the story. It says that he came upon the decision on his own, something he struggled to do in this story. In the next vision, Dalinar spends time with the young Nohadon, the author of the in-world book Way of Kings. He doesn't learn much from the vision, and returns to his normal self frustrated by the lack of information. During the visions, Dalinar has spoken in a skewed gibberish, unlike any words they've heard before. But this time, Navani hears something familiar in his speech, and through relics of a lost language, learn that Dalinar is actually speaking in the ancient language of the people he visits in the visions. This proves that Dalinar isn't hallucinating because there's no way he would have known the words to speak. This is a massive win for the Kholins. They still don't know why the visions are happening, but know it's not because of Dalinar's own madness. Navani and Dalinar continue to discuss the visions. It is a hopeful elation, but it's also more unsettling knowing it's not hallucinations. Navani continues her flirtatious behavior, and when Dalinar reminds her of it, her calm and mysterious demeanor finally evaporates, and she explains her frustrations with the world and with Dalinar, saying, "Why must everyone focus on him? Everyone always worries so much about the man who died. He's not here, Dalinar. He's gone. I miss him, but not as much as you do, it appears. It's been 6 years, and all anyone can see me as is the wife of a dead man. I return because I have no home. I'm expected to sit out of important events because my husband is dead. I won't take it from you, Dalinar. We were friends before I even met Gavilar. You still know me as me, not some shadow of a dynasty that crumbled years ago." He had rarely seen her so sincere, and so he kissed her. Dalinar and Navani discuss hiding their relationship momentarily while so many things are going on. He mostly worries how Elhokar will react to the news, but Navani assures him that her son isn't bright enough to notice such things. Horns sound signaling a Castampine has been seen on the infamous Tower Plateau, the same place where Kaladin tried to side carry, where Sadeas' army took massive losses. It would mean much to the other High Princes if they were to win, as no Alethi group has ever won against the Parshendi on the Tower. Adolin is eager to ride into battle and win at the Tower. The Kholin army commits their entire force, 8,000 soldiers strong, in hopes of wiping out the Parshendi. Dalinar and Adolin begin their assault on the tower. Dalinar reluctantly uses Sadeas' bridge crews on the condition that they won't be used as shields for the rest of the army. Adolin points out that the second Parshendi army is approaching, but Dalinar sees something far worse. Sadeas' army begins to retreat, abandoning the Kholin forces into a corner with no way out. They are all going to die. In the drawing of the tower, you can see that Sadeas' army is on the left, and Dalinar's army fights past them on the right, splitting the Parshendi army up here. So once the second Parshendi army arrives between Sadeas and Dalinar's forces, it creates the perfect excuse for Sadeas to retreat, cutting off any chance that Dalinar had at escaping. And since Dalinar is using Sadeas' bridges, he has no way to escape. Adolin and Dalinar see their inevitable deaths and are crushed by Sadeas' betrayal. Adolin cries out, yelling through the death of war and clash of steel, "I warned you not to trust him. I told you he was an eel." They both retreat, and Dalinar's heart twists inside as he comes to the realization that his mistakes have killed his son and all of his men. "I have led us to destruction," he says. But Adolin does not chastise his father further. His uncertainty about his father's leadership has finally ended. He says, "No, father, it is not your fault. What would you have done differently? Would you stop trying to make something better of Alethkar? Would you become like Sadeas and the others? No, I would not have you become that man, father, regardless of what it would gain us. I wish to the heralds that we hadn't let Sadeas trick us into this, but I will not blame you for his deceit." Adolin's words are exactly what Dalinar needs to hear. He has been so unsure of himself the entire book, following the codes because it gave him stability, but now the confusion was gone. He knew what to do, at long last. No more questions, no more uncertainty. Dalinar stands, heartbroken that this is the end, but relieved to know that he did what was right. With his arc completed, Dalinar gives one final speech to his men. It is time for us to fight, and we do so not because we seek the glory of men, but because the options are worse. We follow the codes not because they bring gain, but because we loathe the people we would otherwise become. We stand here on this battlefield alone because of who we are. Death is the end of all men. What is the measure of him once he is gone? The wealth he accumulated and left his heirs to squabble over? The glory he obtained only to be passed on to those who slew him? The lofty positions we held through happenstance? No, we fight here because we understand. The end is the same. It is the path that separates men. When we taste the end, we will do so with our heads held high, eyes to the sun. I am not ashamed of what I have become. Other men may debase themselves to destroy me. Let them have their glory, for I will retain mine. On the next bridge run, Leighton outfits Bridge 4 with the same carapace armor that Kaladin wore. The battle seems to be going well, but halfway through they are ordered to retreat. It appears that they are abandoning the Kholin army. This was a treachery on a grand scale, terrible enough that it made Amram's betrayal of Kaladin seem almost trivial. Kaladin rushes up to Sadeas to see what's happening and hears him say, "I told you, old friend. I said that honor of yours would get you killed someday." Bridge 4 follows behind the rest of the army. Kaladin convinces the Light Eyes to let his men rest and that they'll catch up with them later. Suddenly, Kaladin sees a way to escape. The army will assume the Parshendi killed them and they can sneak off with the bridges to cross chasms. They're free. Except, without a bridge, Dalinar Kholin and his army will be slaughtered. Syl appears as the size of a regular woman. She stared eastward, her expression horrified, eyes wide and sorrowful. It was the face of a child watching a brutal murder that stole her innocence. The idea of helping Dalinar buds in Kaladin's mind, but he shuts it down. It would be suicide, he says. They'd need an army support to even place the bridge. But watching Dalinar fight twists his heart in knots. Syl says that she finally understands what she is. She's an honor spren, spirit of oaths, of promises, and of nobility. Kaladin desperately tries to convince himself that saving Dalinar Kholin would be like saving Amaram. He turns his back from the battle and says, "We owe them nothing." Kaladin's entire life has led up to this moment, and what makes this scene so special is that every reader knows what Kaladin is going to do. It's been said that no good can come of false means, so he knows that running wouldn't be right. He shouts defiantly, "I've been here before. What happened last time? I've learned. I won't be a fool again. I owe you nothing, Kholin." And his father's voice seemed to whisper a reply. "Somebody has to start, son. Somebody has to step forward and do what is right, because it is right. If nobody starts, then others cannot follow. The Light Eyes don't care about life. So I must. So we must. So you must." Then Kaladin says, "We have to go back." One by one, members of Bridge 4 nodded. Men who had been the dregs of the army just months before, men who had cared for nothing but their own skins, took deep breaths, tossed away their safety, and nodded. They would follow him. A few months ago, Kaladin wanted to kill himself because he didn't value his own life. Now, he cares so much about preserving life that he saves an entire army. Bridge 4 runs an assault on the tower. The Parshendi see them coming, so they loose a volley of arrows, and Bridge 4 uses the side carry to block them. However, another volley is coming from the other side, so Kaladin screams, Stormlight infusing the air around him, as he threw every bit of it he had into his shield. Suddenly, hundreds of arrows crashed into his shield. Bridge 4 is setting the bridge in place, but Kaladin is too exhausted to even stand. Using that much Stormlight so fast to bind all the arrows left his body completely drained of energy. Then, the last flashback of the book is shown, where Kaladin's little brother Tien was killed. It takes place a few months after Kaladin and Tien were forced to join Amram's army, the most dreadful day of Kaladin's life. Tien was supposed to be a messenger boy, but instead they put him in the front line to distract the enemy soldiers. Tien was killed as soon as the battle started, and Kaladin saw the whole thing. He held his brother long into the night, whispering, "I'll protect you, Tien." Kaladin comes out of the flashback. He would not let it happen again. With barely enough strength to stand, Kaladin grabs a spear. The bridge is only halfway across the chasm, so Kaladin runs and leaps off the end of it, straight into the Parshendi army. Sucking in Stormlight from the beards of Parshendi soldiers, bursting with energy and light, Kaladin speaks the second ideal of the Knights Radiant. "I will protect those who cannot protect themselves." Dalinar and Adolin continue to fight, their army almost decimated. The arrival of the bridgemen gives them hope, and they frantically fight to get to the edge of the tower. Then, when it seems like they might actually live this fight, the Parshendi Shardbearer arrives. Dalinar and the Shardbearer fight briefly, and Dalinar's armor is nearly destroyed. Once his helmet breaks, the enemy shardbearer sees his face and says, "It is you. I have found you at last." Then Kaladin stabs the shardbearer in the leg, and Dalinar and him are able to retreat. Eshonai doesn't really play a role in this story, so I'll talk about her in a later video. When the battle is over, Dalinar tells Kaladin that he will keep him safe from Sadeas. Kaladin still doesn't trust him, but with so many wounded bridgemen both with him and back at Sadeas' camp, he decides going with Dalinar is the best option. When Dalinar sees Navani, he hugs her in public. He says, "I've spent too much time worrying about what people think. When I thought my time had arrived, I realized that all my worrying had been wasted. In the end, I was pleased with how I lived my life. I see things differently now. It is time to stop letting myself be shoved around by lying men." Dalinar confronts Sadeas and only asks him why. Sadeas says that he doesn't need Dalinar to fight the Parshendi, and Gavilar's reliance on the codes is what got him killed. He won't let Dalinar's influence on Elhokar lead the king to the same fate. Sadeas also says that what he did was a mercy. Rather than let Dalinar descend further into madness, he'd let him die now. Dalinar intends to deal with Sadeas later. For now, he wants to buy all the bridgemen. Sadeas is unwilling to part with them, for the sole reason that Dalinar wants them. Dalinar offers 60 emerald realms per man, 20 times the price of a slave. Sadeas denies his offer, so Dalinar slams his shardblade into the ground, offering it for the bridgemen. Everyone is shocked, especially Kaladin. This weapon is worth fortunes, cities, palaces, kingdoms. Of course, Sadeas takes the deal. Kaladin cannot believe what he just saw. He asks Dalinar what just happened, and Dalinar says softly, "What is a man's life worth?" "A life is priceless," Kaladin replied immediately. Coincidentally, that is the exact value of a shardblade. So today, you and your men sacrificed to buy me 2,600 priceless lives, and all I had to repay you with was a priceless sword. I call that a bargain. Dalinar leaves the bridgeman and walks straight to Elhokar's camp. Striding up to him, he kicks him straight in the chest, throwing the king across the room. Then he says, "The girth on your horse during the hunt. You cut it yourself, didn't you?" In his paranoia, Elhokar faked the assassination attempt to get the attention of the High Princes. That's why he was so confident that the strap on his saddle was cut. Dalinar tells Elhokar that he is not his enemy. By barging in there and beating him up, he shows Elhokar that he could have killed Elhokar 100 different times if he wanted to. He tells him that he is Elhokar's greatest ally and that he loves him like a son. He also tells Elhokar, "Your mother and I are now courting. You better get used to that," and leaves. The story returns to Shallan, where she sits in shame reflecting on Capsul's attempted murder and accidental suicide. It turns out that Capsul is part of the Ghostbloods, a secret clan that Shallan's father was a part of, and the same group of people that threatened their family. She draws the scene of Capsul giving her the bread from memory, and something odd occurs. Shallan remembers that Jasnah ate the poisoned bread, but didn't get poisoned like Shallan or Capsul did. And Capsul ate the jam, which was the antidote, but died anyway. It turns out that Jasnah soul-casted the piece of bread she ate, then soul-casted the jam, thinking it could have been poisoned. Jasnah performed soul-casting without using a soul-caster, indicating that she never possessed one. Consequently, this implied that Shallan had never had a soulcaster either. The symbols that Shallan had been drawing and the voices she heard is actually a cryptic, a type of spren similar to Syl. And cryptics are sometimes called lie spren because they deal with deceitfulness, something Shallan has been practicing the entire novel, meaning this spren was giving her some sort of power, similar to Syl giving Kaladin powers. Elhokar was actually seeing lie spren when he was deceiving Dalinar. "They watch me, always waiting. I see their faces in mirrors, symbols, twisted, inhuman." Shallan talks to the spren and asks it to bring her to Shadesmar, the world of spren and oceans made of beads. The spren says that it needs a truth, so Shallan says that she killed her father. The spren accepts this. Jasnah also bonded a spren, which is why she's able to soulcast. There are different orders of Knights Radiant that I'll get to in a later video, but for now, we've seen Kaladin bond with Syl, Shallan with a cryptic named Pattern, and Jasnah's spren is called Ivory. Shallan confronts Jasnah about this and asks again to be her ward. She knows all of Jasnah's secrets, and her desire to continue learning about bonded spren and Shadesmar convince Jasnah to accept her. Jasnah also knows more about the Knights Radiant and how powerful and influential that makes Shallan. Shallan confronting Jasnah was the final act in her arc. She transitioned from a girl driven by desperation and deceit to a young woman who's beginning to understand her own strength and purpose. She no longer sees herself as merely a tool to save her family, but as someone who can make a meaningful impact on the world. Jasnah says that they are going to study the Voidbringers together, but Shallan makes a discovery that even Jasnah didn't notice. The Voidbringers are described as ash and fire. Parshmen and Parshendi have black and red skin, meaning there is some sort of correlation, so they decide to sail to the Shattered Plains to study them. The story returns to Szeth, where he is in Kharbranth, about to kill the last king on his list, Taravangian. Except Taravangian surprises Szeth by holding his oath stone. It turns out that Taravangian had been his master this whole time, killing other kings in the name of stability. Taravangian says that Szeth's acts tear down the structure of society so they can build a new one with stronger walls. Taravangian shows Szeth the death rattle of people dying in his hospitals. Again, Taravangian mentions the dichotomy of killing to save. It is better for one man to sin than for a people to be destroyed. Taravangian's next task for Szeth is to kill Dalinar Kholin. Dalinar and Kaladin discuss their new arrangement to have Bridge 4 act as Dalinar's personal bodyguards and the rest of the bridge crews to join his army. Dalinar says that I owe you my life twice over, and Kaladin responds that he already paid that debt. Dalinar then asks Kaladin why he rescued him. Kaladin responds by asking, "Why did you give up your shard blade?" The two men just met, but through this interaction, they seem to understand each other, more so than most others ever will. Kaladin returns to his camp to find Bridge 4 sitting by the fire together, telling stories and eating stew. They don't know what to make of Kaladin's supposed superpowers, but they still agree to follow him. Kaladin's arc comes to a finale when he sits down and reflects on the day. 3 more men were dead, Malop, Earless Jax, and Narm. Kaladin had failed them, but he and Bridge 4 had protected hundreds of others, hundreds who would never have to run a bridge again, would never have to face Parshendi arrows, would never have to fight again if they didn't want to. More personally, 27 of his friends lived, partially because of what he'd done, partially because of their own heroism. 27 men lived. He'd finally managed to save someone. For now, that was enough. The Way of Kings is about the responsibility of leadership and the value of life. It shows the kind of person one can become when life doesn't matter, like in the case of Sadeas. And it also shows the good that can come from choosing to care, not selfishly, but because it is the right thing to do. The first ideal of the Knights Radiant perfectly illustrates Kaladin's journey. Life before death is about preserving life. Like I said, Kaladin starts his journey trying to take his own life before saving himself and thousands of others. Strength before weakness is about serving others, because all men are weak at times, and the strong must protect the weak, which relates to Kaladin's depression. He had to pull Bridge 4 out of their apathetic state to save them, and they did the same for him. Journey through destination is about achieving one's goal through honorable means. If Kaladin and Bridge 4 were to escape without saving Dalinar, it wouldn't have been right. Letting someone die is the same as killing them, so Kaladin chose to save them. In Dalinar's final chapter, he is in another vision. The vision seems to be the same as the first vision. Dalinar learns that his visions appear to be scripted messages, and that the voice was never talking to him, just anyone who would listen. It's confirmed that the visions are messages from the Almighty, although he says that he is dead. The purpose of the visions was to warn someone about the upcoming desolation, the Everstorm, and Odium. As I mentioned earlier, the epilogue is Talonel arriving in Roshar, exclaiming that he has lost the battle and the Voidbringers are coming. The epigraphs at the beginning of each chapter don't tie directly to the story, but they do provide some foreshadowing and world-building. The epigraphs in Part 1 and 4 are called death rattles, where the person proclaims odd, non-sequitur phrases before they die. We see these a few times, like when Maps died and when Taravangian slowly kills subjects in his hospitals to study the death rattles. Part 3's epigraphs are segments of Yasta's notes while she studies the Voidbringers, the Everstorm, the ancient city of Urithiru, and other ominous prophecies. Part 2's epigraphs are the most interesting, in my opinion, because they detail a conversation between Hoid and a dragon named Frost. Frost is a dragon who lives on another world, but we don't know much about him since his only appearance so far is in the epigraphs. There does appear to be a dragon-like creature on the inside cover of The Way of Kings, but this was never confirmed, and most people just think it's some sort of Kremling or chasm fiend. The only other dragon to show up in the Cosmere is Sixis in Tress of the Emerald Sea. Hoyt seems to be begging for Frost's help, so he must be very powerful or all-knowing. The herald images at the beginning of each chapter are directly related to something happening in that chapter. Sometimes it's more obvious, and other times it's more ambiguous. In most cases, the herald is mentioned or alluded to. In other chapters, the herald is connected to an order of the Knights Radiant, and the POV character has either sworn the ideals or will eventually. In rarer cases, the herald actually makes an appearance, or their honor blade does, like in Szeth's chapters. Sometimes in the place of a herald is a masked figure. This means Hoid will make an appearance or have an influence on the story. The cover of Way of Kings shows Eshonai on the right and Kaladin on the left. All of the artists are tagged below. Go check them out if you want to see more Cosmere art. Thank you for watching.